Thank you, Dan. And welcome again to our celebration of the Centennial of this department here. We'll start with the first panel discussion, which is on the future of aerospace academics and research. The panel is composed by three very distinguished colleagues in the field of aerospace education research. We have Professor Charbel Farhat, which is the chair of the Aero Astro department at Stanford University. Professor Jaime Peraire, which is the chair of the Aero Astro department at MIT. And we have Professor Alec Gallimore, which is an associate dean here at the University of Michigan. The panel will be moderated by Professor Earl Dowell, who will give you more details about each of the panelists participating on this. Dr. Dowell is the William Holland Hall Professor in the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke University. He's an elected member of the National Academy of Engineering, an honorary fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and a fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, as well as the American Academy of Mechanics, for which he was one time its president. Dr. Dowell has received numerous awards from the AWA. He has received the Structural Dynamics and Materials Award, also the von Karman Lectureship and the Critchlow Trust Prize. Dr. Dowell has also received from SME the Spirit of St. Louis Medal, the Dan Hartog Award, and the Lyapunov Medal. And he has also received the Guggenheim Medal, which is a joint award with AWA, ASME, AHS, and ASE. Dr. Dowell's research ranges over the topics of air elasticity, non-steady aerodynamics, nonlinear dynamics, very close to my heart, actually, in that regard. In addition of being an author of over 300 publications, he's also author or co-author of 4 books in air elasticity and dynamics. Dr. Dowell received his BS degree from the University of Illinois and his master's and doctoral degrees from MIT before going to Duke as the dean of the School of Engineering there. He served, he taught at both MIT and Princeton. Well, anyway, with any further ado, I'd like us to welcome Professor Earl Dowell and the panel for this first presentation today. Earl?
Thank you, Carlos. That's very kind, very generous. I didn't know you were going to give my complete life history, but it's good to hear those nice things being said. You did leave out my most important achievement, particularly for this occasion. I'm the parent of 2 Michigan graduates, both of my daughters. Yeah, Marla graduated in physics and Jan in philosophy, so we covered the intellectual spectrum to some degree, and they've both been educating me since that time. And so I have benefited indirectly from 2 Michigan educations. This is the panel on aerospace engineering education and research. My moderator role is to keep these 3 tigers, more or less on time and headed in what we hope will be an interesting and stimulating direction. Dan Inman has helped us frame some questions which we have massaged and torn apart and put back together again. You've already met our panelists briefly, but let me say a few more words about them. Charbel Farhat, to the far left from me, and you're right, chair of aerospace engineering at Stanford. Charbel is, in his other life, an expert in computational modeling and fluids and solids and their interaction. Probably does other things beyond that, but I've heard him give presentations on several occasions, most recently at Duke, actually. And I'm now looking forward to what he has to say about education. I'm not sure this is something we've actually discussed before, but there will be a tendency for us to slip into jargon and research discussions, but we'll try to avoid that. Jaime Peraire, of course, is the chair of, I think it's Aeronautics and Astronautics at MIT, right? And I'm told that they are also approximately 100 years young and celebrating in October. So for those of you who want another birthday party, feel free to be in Cambridge sometime in October, and I know they're going to have a grand occasion as well. And good to have you with us. And he's also done some very fine work on something called reduced order modeling. So we may have a trio of reduced order models here if we're not careful. Alec Gallimore, of course, as you know, is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here in the college, and had occasion to be here a few years ago, and Alec gave us a tour of your laboratory and waxed eloquent about plasmas and propulsion and all that, so we'll see if that slips into the conversation at some point as well. But the three topics that we're going to cover are, within the context of aerospace engineering, are distance learning, that's Charbel. Then we're going to hear about undergraduate education, initially at least from Alec. And then we'll talk about research and that ever popular topic, research funding. And Jaime will tell us what's going to happen along those lines. Will tell us what's going to happen along those lines. Well, let's begin with Charbel. As many of you know, Stanford has been a pioneer in distance learning. They've spun off a couple of companies. And I tend to find people are either very positive and very enthusiastic or very skeptical and less than enthusiastic about distance learning. So I can't wait to hear what Charbel thinks. So Charbel, lead us off.
Thank you, Earl. Let me first congratulate the Department of Aeronautics at Michigan for their 100th anniversary, and congratulate the university. And thank you guys for inviting me and make me feel much younger despite my gray hair. We're only 56 years old, so we feel energized. At lunch, my colleague Peraire reminded me how difficult it is to predict the future, and we're much more comfortable sticking to the present, if not the past. So I thought before getting into interesting issues like whether online education is really suitable for engineering or aerospace engineering or anything that has experiments, I'd like to a little bit summarize to you what brought us to this MOOCs that we're talking about. So as you all know, MOOC is a massive open online course, which is an online course that is aimed at an unlimited participation and open access via the web. It is only a recent development in something that is much older than this, and it began to emerge only about 2 years ago, in 2012, so almost 3 years ago. So the history that I think is a little bit relevant for the discussion, and I'll go very briefly within my 5 minutes. So New York University in 1922 operated its own radio stations with plans to broadcast all its courses. Other schools, including Columbia, Harvard, Kansas State, and many other universities followed. Students read textbooks, they listened to the broadcast lectures, and they mailed their quizzes and the exams and received by mail their evaluations. So the journalist Bruce Bliven asked, "Is radio to become a chief arm of education? Will the classroom be abolished and the child of the future be stuffed with facts as he sits at home or even as he walks about the streets with his portable receiving set in his pocket?" This is 1922, ladies and gentlemen. Does it ring a bell? Completion rates were very low. Cheating was hard to detect. And there was no way to collect tuition fees. Does it sound familiar? 1922. Most importantly, by the 1940s, radio courses had virtually disappeared in the United States. I'm not jumping to conclusion. But before continuing the history, let me fast forward to 2013 and open a quick parenthesis here. Klaus Johnson is a well-known Swedish mathematician, and he works on problems that are very relevant to aeronautics. His take on MOOC is well summarized by the following statement, which I picked from his blog. "The gut reaction to this challenge," meaning the MOOC, "from the traditional university teacher is to view MOOC as a disturbance, which will soon fade away like any disturbances if properly neglected." So we'll come back to this. But let's move now from the 20s to the 80s. At many universities in the 80s, and certainly at Michigan, I assume, classrooms were linked to a remote campus to provide closed-circuit video access to some students. The CBS TV series Sunrise Semester, with cooperation with the NYU, also offered course credit. In 1994, James O'Donnell at the University of Pennsylvania taught a seminar course over the internet that attracted 500 people. In 2008, in Canada, Dave Cormier at the University of Prince Edward Island coined the term MOOC. So it wasn't coined at Stanford, it really was coined in Canada. Today, the online education provider Allison, that started about that time, records 1.2 million visitors per month with about 250,000 graduates for more than 500 courses. Now, 2012 was really the official year of the MOOC, because this is where we heard of Coursera and Udacity. As you can expect, it came from Stanford. What was a little bit more surprising, it didn't come from 2 undergraduates, it came from 2 faculty who apparently had time to work on this. So they launched 3 courses: Introduction to AI by Sebastian Thrun and Peter Norvig, and 2 other CS courses. I believe one of them was on databases by Jennifer Widom and by Andrew Ng. Each of these 3 courses had enrollment higher than 100,000, with one of them as 160,000. So Thrun founded Udacity, and Kohler and NG founded Coursera. Now this brings me to the second connection with aeronautics besides Klaus Johnson. Before Coursera, Andrew Ng developed one of the most capable autonomous helicopters in the world, and he also developed Aero, the widely used open source robotic software platform. So now we move to 2013. Early data from Coursera suggests a completion rate of 7% to 9%. Interestingly, a few months ago, Andrew announced that actually he was stepping down from his day-to-day work at Coursera, and now he's the chief scientist at Baidu, the Chinese version of Google. So after low performance rates, low student satisfaction, and apparently faculty revolt, Thrun announced that he was also giving up on MOOCs as a vision for higher education disruption, and announced the shift in the focus of Udacity to corporate training efforts. So in the defense of the failed effort, he and others have cited the innovation cycle that has to come, with these little things. So ladies and gentlemen, was Klaus Johnson right when he stated that MOOC is a disturbance which, if ignored, will essentially fade away? Or was James Grimmelman, the New York Law School professor who stated a few months ago right when he said, "No one's got the models that's going to work yet. I expect all the current ventures to fail because the expectations are too high. People think something will catch on like wildfire, and there's no question in my mind that this is how we acted, particularly in administration across all the universities. But more likely, it's maybe a decade later that somebody figures out how to really do it and how to make money." So this is a little bit the background for this version of distance
Charbel,
education.
that's a great introduction. Thank you so much. By the way, those of you in the audience who may have strong opinions on one or more topics we raise, about 45 minutes from now, you'll have your chance to quiz our distinguished panel. But before we get to there, Jaime, MIT has gotten a great deal of visibility about making their courses free online and all that. What's happening there, and what do you see going forward?
The last part is the difficult question. What happens going forward? It's something that I think MIT and the whole community, and including Euroschool, of course, is trying to wrestle with and trying to figure out how to actually cope with it. I just want to point out some data points or just some anecdotes that I think are going to change. I think the change that is happening is somewhat irreversible. I don't know what we are going to be looking at, but I do not really believe that this online education is going to come and go. I don't think we are going to go online 100%, but I think it's going to have an impact on the way we educate on campuses and on the way that people learn. Just a couple of anecdotes. At some point, some of these early courses that were being offered at MIT, the faculty had 2 versions. One version which is offered to the world, the other version which is offered to the MIT community. And as you know, in these courses, there are these learning communities where students pose questions and somebody else answers the question, and there is a hierarchy. based on how well you do at answering your questions. You become a guru, and so on. And we very soon realized that as smart as we think our students are, it was a real disadvantage not to open the world or the forum that is open to the whole world to our own students. Because no matter what question you ask, how hard a problem you pose, if you open it to a community of 50 or 60,000 people around the world, somebody's going to get the answer and is going to get it right and is going to get a very clever one. So that's something that we really realized very soon. You can't really not isolate your own group and try to offer a niche education without access to the rest of the world and to the distributed talent which is out there. So that's actually an important point I'd like to make. The other one is that for us, the precursor of this online education was the open courseware, a time where we started putting courses on the internet. Well, we found out that OpenCourseWare was a tremendous success, but also we found out that one of the major users of OpenCourseWare were our own students. So a lot of the students, a lot of the people that spend time looking at the courses we post online for the rest of the world actually come from MIT. So that, again, is a question that I pose out there. I don't know, everybody can draw different conclusions, but that's what I was going to say.
Well, on that point, what's the impact of that, of your own students using this capability in terms of class attendance? And do you care, as long as they learn the material?
The second is true. We don't really care as long as they learn the material, but we are trying to find out a sustainable way, and that's a very difficult question, to offer education on campus and at the same time maintain our presence in the online world. Different missions, different objectives. And we think that part of the solution is to align objectives, to reuse a lot of the material that we offer online for our on-campus classes. But I would say the level of success so far has been mixed. So we haven't been all that successful in that. And before I give up the word to Alec, I really should have started also by congratulating Michigan on the 100 years. You really have a lot to be proud of. It's been a tremendous ride. 100 years in aerospace is really the whole of the aerospace field and career. And just to dispel any confusion, you guys are the first undergraduate program. We'll give you that. However,
you have the best undergraduate. They have one.
What happened in 1914 at MIT is that we had our first master's program in aeronautics. The department was not created until 25 years later. So once again, congratulations.
Very good, very good. Alec, weigh in on this.
Sure.
Resolve all these dilemmas for us.
Sure, sure. University of Michigan joined up the Coursera team right away. We were one of the original 8. And I would say that we jumped in and we really, as a very comprehensive, broad university with hundreds of programs, we looked at Coursera as a very interesting way of educating a vast number of students in different areas, ranging from political science to the humanities to social sciences to computer science to engineering, of course. We did a lot of experimentation in that. And what we did, I think I would echo exactly where we are, is what I've heard from my colleagues up here, is that there's a little bit of wait and see. We hear from people in industry in particular that they all believe that MOOCs and just the paradigm shift of being able to have access to education anywhere in the globe is disruptive. And they actually utilize an example of newspapers versus the internet as a way of showing how it can be very disruptive. Having said that, when you actually peel through the data, and you did a nice job providing some of the data, it's not clear that the penetration has been that good in engineering in particular. Computer science has been good, but not in other fields of engineering. Also, if you look at where our demand is in terms of what our customers are demanding of us, our customers being our students, the parents, and of course, and guardians, and of course, industry. Because of global competition, not in a position to be able to wait a long time to train their engineers coming. They want engineers who are, dare I say, shovel ready. And I think where we are in Michigan, and I believe as a community, we believe the way of doing that is by engaged learning, hands-on experiential learning. So the question I think in my mind, and maybe this is a little bit what I'll talk about, is what's the best way blending an ability, especially with students who come from disparate backgrounds and have disparate ways of learning, to, for example, be able to learn in their dorm rooms. And actually there have been studies that show that you can glean the same amount of information by actually speeding up the movies by about 2x and going back and forth, back and forth. So it's a very different way of learning versus the notion of needing to engage in engineering practice as a student, sort of the medical school paradigm of see one, do one, and teach one. And so in my mind, that's the interesting and rich question of how to blend those two seemingly conflicting futures into one that makes sense.
Now, one of your points is, I think, that even within STEM, there are some fields in STEM that are more readily adaptable to a distance learning environment than others. And I know many of us have heard about the Georgia Tech computer science program, which is fascinating in many levels. And I think what you're telling us in part is that you think that that particular field may lend itself more readily to this kind of revolution than others. Is the distinction between having a physical laboratory experience, perhaps, and not having to have such experience, is that part of it?
I think to first order that is, again, if we look at what the medical school is doing, first of all, they traditionally have needed a physical experience, patient practice, et cetera, cadavers. And they've done a lot of experiments as a field of what can you shift into the virtual world to shift costs and increase the number of throughput of the education of physicians. So I'm not saying that that's not possible in the future at some point, that there may be some virtual experiments you do down the road. I just don't see that coming anytime soon. So I think there are going to be areas of engineering education where both in the classroom, in the laboratory, and frankly, extracurricular, co-curricular activities through student team projects and internships, where it's really going to be critical for engineers to become engineers by actually practicing engineering, problem solving, and asking the question to yourself, why didn't that work and what do I do to get it to work?
Very good. Jaime, did you want to say something else?
Yes, I like to perhaps look at it from a different perspective. Perhaps the focus of the question was how are we going to cope with online education on our campuses, and I think everything that has been said I do agree with. But I think the major impact, or the real impact that online education is going to have, is not going to be for the 3 or 4% in one of the richest, or the richest country in the world. It's going to be for the hundreds of thousands of people out there who do not have access to information, to education, who are going to be able to really look at courses that, sure, are not going to be as perfect. They are not going to have as rich of an experiential component, but they are going to be a quantum leap from zero. Anything that it's incremental from zero is a lot. And in that respect, I think that's going to have a major impact. I think we are going to have people who are going to figure out ways, if you get them started, around the world in a distributed manner to learn and to figure out how to do things. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to be part of that or not? Or we just, because somebody is going to do it, somewhere it's going to happen, and I think this is the real question. The example we always give out there is, you cannot teach somebody how to ski just with an online class, and it is true, but an online class can help you, and if you have skis on your own and you are next to a slope, taking an online class before going down may be helpful. That's the only comment I would say.
Charbel, would you like the last word on this topic?
I don't know if it's the last word, but you know, I always like to throw in some controversial aspect just
Please.
to. So, do we want to be part of it, Jaime? Part of what exactly? Because when we say it's a disruptive technology, who is disruptive? The educational part or the technology part? I mean, the point of my history was to show you that people thought about it with radio. Yeah, right. Then I thought about it with TV. And then next came the internet. So it's really, this is all about the disruptive power of the internet, much more than the disruptive power of the MOOC, even though I'm going to tone down this a little bit in a second. So the question is, by the time someone figures out, as someone said, how to do it, how to make money with it, probably there'll be some quantum, I don't know what, then we won't even be talking about the internet, we'll be talking about something else, and we'll be trying to catch. Now, it's interesting that from my understanding of the people around me at Stanford, that the community now is going in two different paths. There is the X-MOOCs and there are the C-MOOCs, the connectivity people and the extended people. I think that at MIT it's called edX, if I remember correctly. It was called something else first, but then it became edX, where the X extended mean that it is not meant to really replace the standard teaching. It's more like a complement. It reminds me of, you know, the argument between computational prediction and wind tunnel testing. And then, you know, first you go with the hype that we're going to get off, you know, we're going to get rid of all the wind tunnels, and then you realize that we're going to complement them so that you use it, you know, when you cannot afford doing a wind tunnel experiment and everything. And that's always, any careful position, you know, usually has more likelihood that it's going to turn out right. So, and then the C-MOOCs, the connectivity people, I mean, there is a concept of disruptive education in the following sense. Today, who owns the course? The faculty pretty much own the course. I mean, you can use a scientific paradigm to organize the content, but you organize it according to how you want to, how you believe it is, hopefully. You do it how you believe is the best way to do it. And in a certain way, you know, without exaggerating the word, but you own the student at the same time because this is your product, you're trying to do it in this very specific way. Now, part of the MOOCs philosophy is that this is going to all change because you have the way you're going to be doing these assessments and involving multiple people, you get it back, run it through some machine learning algorithm. This is the background of the Stanford people who started Coursera, for example. And that's going to give you the feedback to see how you're doing. And therefore, it's based on that feedback how you would develop the next generation course. So to throw some controversy here, you can say that's probably the right way to do it. But you could argue this is like governing with polls. I mean, you know, so I do it depending on did people like it or not. It's never an easy way, one way or the other. And that's why I think that, yes, it's a time scale issue. Probably at some point, some version of this is going to come up. But I'm wondering how big or short that time scale is, and if by that time, the internet itself would be obsolete, and God knows what is going to be the next. So we would have had the radio, the TV, the internet, and the unobtainium, you know, that probably will come later. So,
very good. Well, with that, let's turn our attention to our next topic. We haven't exhausted this one, but I think we've made a good start. Hopefully, stimulated some questions from the audience. Alec, tell us about undergraduate education and what the future of that's going to look like.
I'll use the podium if I may.
Okay.
I'd like to start by providing some remarks, and my remark is titled, "Why is Higher Ed Under Assault?" Professor Richard Vedder, an economist at Ohio University, who in 2004 wrote the book titled Going Broke by Degree, Why College Costs Too Much, recently wrote an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal with his student Christopher Dennard called How the College Bubble Will Pop. Dennard and Vedder made the argument that because of the gap in earning potential of college grads versus non-college grads is narrowing at a time when the cost of attending college is on the rise, the higher education bubble is about to burst. While this piece has been attacked by others as being misleading in its proclamation that the total college enrollment has dropped 1.5% since 2012, interesting enough, which is true for for-profit colleges and community colleges, but not true for public and private nonprofit four-year colleges. The refrain, "Is college worth it?" comes from many, many corners. To spark our next discussion, I want to share briefly a few statistics about starting salaries and college costs, a few observations about demand for what we do, and a few thoughts about the public good. When I graduated with my BS in aeronautical engineering in 1986, the average graduating engineer could expect to command a salary of around $27,000. The overall inflation rate since 1986 is about 115%, means that $27,000 in 1986 translates to a salary of $58,500 today. This past year, the average U.S. college graduate started off with a salary of around $48,700, and those who were fortunate enough to major in aerospace engineering started off with a bachelor's degree salary of $64,000, slightly better than inflation. By contrast, if college tuition back in '86 was $8,000, college tuition should be $17,200 now. But over the same period, the college education inflation rate was been 500%. Over that same time period, we go from $8,000 to what should be considerably more, but not so much more, $17,200, to what the actual cost is right now, over $40,000. If one adds to this fact the unemployment rate for new college graduates is higher now than in the past, for example, 6% this past year versus 3% in 2001, and people view online education and for-profit universities and MOOCs and other things as more affordable alternatives, one can understand how traditional education is under assault. But things are a little different in engineering, right? After all, engineering and computer science rank as the highest paid fields for those coming out of college and among the most lucrative professions, period. Students with good grades from decent schools can often command salaries of $70,000 right out with a bachelor's, and in some fields, for example, petroleum engineering, the starting salaries are over $90,000. Who says fossil fuels are passé? Guess what? These trends have been noticed, particularly by parents. Let me give you some observations how we see that here at the University of Michigan. If we were to go back to 2004, we've seen that the number of applications to the College of Engineering at Michigan has tripled. At the same time, when the number of applications to the entire University of Michigan, the undergraduate population, has doubled. If one were to go back to 2004, one would say that the quality of our students in the usual metrics is about the same as the university overall. It's very different now, and in all metrics except for one, the quality of our entering students in engineering is higher. The difference, of course, is diversity. Our students, by and large, are less diverse in terms of women, underrepresented minorities, and socioeconomically. When I was talking about what I was going to say today to my 10-year-old son, he asked me a very interesting question. He said, what can a person do to teach that a computer can't do? You got to keep in mind that he's part of the Khan Academy, the Big Brown Bear, and the Minecraft scene. So it's an interesting question that he's taught by computers and by people. While we might be tempted to say, oh, isn't that a cute kind of question, thinking about a recent study that was done and where undergraduates whose brain activities were monitored were showed to have the same level of stimulation during lectures as they do watching TV. In fact, they had considerably more stimulation when they were sleeping than when they were attending class. Keep that in mind next time somebody's dozing off in your lecture. Finally, allow me to share a few thoughts about engineering education and the public good. We are at a very special time when the challenges of the world demand that we produce wiser engineers, which I believe is best done through hands-on experiential learning and novel teaching schemes in the classroom, such as flipped classroom, flat classrooms, and a blend of online and in-class lecture instruction. If it sounds expensive, that's because it can be, given the fact that we need more expensive equipment and facilities and the potential need for small student-to-instructor ratios in the classroom. These are all things our customers want. These things also come at a time when the very fabric of what it means to be in aerospace engineering, in my opinion, is in flux, with non-traditional areas such as software, avionics, human factors, systems, business, environmental consideration, etc., all play a more critical role in the aerospace systems we develop. But our customers also want cost containment. In the decades that followed World War II, the greatest generation looked at education and research as a public good that would build a great nation, send humans to space, win the Cold War, and contribute to our prosperity, health, and overall security. Today, one might argue that our nation has somewhat abandoned this notion and instead looks at higher education as a private benefit, measured in terms of the impact on earning capacity of graduates rather than the national insurance, and hence concluding that it should be supported by individual students and parents rather than taxpayers. If this trend continues, will the notion of engineering for the public good go by the wayside? I submit that our great challenges as we embrace a changing world and a more demanding public is to broaden our views of what aerospace engineering is and therefore what is important to cover in our curricula, expand our instructional toolkit to incorporate more hands-on experiential learning for authentic engineering practice, and finally, find ways to make the cost of our schools more manageable and therefore more accessible to a broader swath of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. You gave us a great introduction to that topic. And now let's turn to our other panelists who will either violently agree or disagree, as the case may be. Before I do that, though, this reminds me of a book that Bill Bowen, the former president of Princeton, wrote probably 20, 25 years ago, pointing out why it was inevitable that university costs would increase at a rate greater than inflation, because there's no economy of scale, there's no real technology solution to how we deploy education. But that seems to me comes right back, in part at least, to our previous conversation about distance learning. It's possible that what's different today is that the cost factor is so substantial that perhaps that will lead us to adopt solutions that would have been intolerable not too many years ago. But Jaime, what do you think?
I think it was an excellent description of the situation as is. I fully agree with everything that you actually said. And I would say that in the context of aerospace, this threat is even worse. And I really picked up on the point that you made that education is shifting from being a public benefit to society, educating our young people, to being a personal benefit. And in aerospace, I think the price we may end up paying may be just too high. In the particular case of aerospace, we are looking at a sector which I think, in general, we are not acknowledging how important it is to our economy and to our innovation. Our politician society, I don't think is giving it enough credit. I think there is a little bit of ignorance out there as to how important it is to our well-being. But we have an aging workforce. We have some sectors growing, some air transportation is growing, military is in real trouble. The reality of it is that even in a situation with an aging workforce and real concerns about replacing the current talent, people are being laid off. And the big question is, if we really want to bounce back at some point, it's not clear how we're going to do it, especially with the educational system that we have. Mm-hmm. So all I would like to add is that what you've described in the particular context of aerospace may still have a multiplicative effect that makes it even more dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Charbel, what do you think?
Well, I think that, as both speakers mentioned, everybody would agree on all these observations. The one that I am more interested in is what has changed? I mean, who is responsible for this cost in the positive sense, which is what is driving the cost up? So as a chair of a department, mm-hmm. I'm responsible for the fiscal aspect of the department, and my biggest expense is really the salaries of the faculty. Mm-hmm. So this is like an optimization problem. You can say hip, 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 hurrah, depending on what starting point you started from to achieve your optimum. So does this mean that we are overpaid now, or does this mean that 20 years ago we were underpaid? So what has really changed? What is driving the cost, so high? If you take something in parallel, I mean, talking about books, if you look at Norm Augustine's books about what the cost of a fighter jet, to keep it in the context of aeronautics is, I mean, there were clearly some factors they were identified, like compliance, classification issues, and a number of other factors. But at least there were factors that were identified. What is the reason today why this cost is spiraling? And yes, probably it is, but how about the medical cost? I mean, I still think, going to the hospital is far more expensive than, paying your entire degree. So there are things that are spiraling out of control. I think it's far more important to figure out why than just observing it. And in the case of tuition, I am not sure I understand exactly. I'm not well positioned, I guess, to understand what is driving the cost of tuition.
Well, I'm not sure how this applies to Michigan, but I suspect it applies to MIT, Stanford, and certainly to Duke, and perhaps a few others, nobly excepting Princeton, which has enough endowment that this doesn't apply what I'm about to say. If you look at what happens to Duke, when we raise tuition $1, we net 70 cents because we take 30 cents and plow it back into undergraduate financial aid. So if you look at the increase in salaries of faculty and staff, it's the net increase in tuition. So the gross increase always exceeds that and also exceeds the rate of inflation. So in many private universities, even those who are relatively well endowed, including Duke, but not really well endowed, such as Princeton, that's what's the driver.
We get 4% of our total budget from the state. So we're in that same. So in other words, we're in a very similar type of situation.
Yeah, well, that's right. So public universities are becoming financially,
right.
Such as Michigan at least, becoming financially much more like private universities. And when my daughters attended Michigan as out-of-state students and as the parent paying the tuition, I was paying a price that was very close to the Duke prize, and happy to do it, of course. Actually, it was because at Duke, if you're on the faculty, 3/4 of that is covered by Duke University. So I wasn't too
you're very right. I looked at some numbers, not enough to make statistics, but I did look at more than a dozen numbers that even at places that have the reputation of being expensive, like Stanford and MIT, actually it's the same price that any other private university, whether it's highly reputed or not.
It's a very narrow band.
It's almost the same thing. I mean, you wouldn't make a decision based on that delta. The delta is so negligible that it doesn't make any difference. And a lot of it is because endowments, at these places kicks in to help. So it goes back. So is it really spiraling out of control? Or, I mean, the inflation example you mentioned that was quoted from that Wall Street Journal is certainly telling, but so are other things in life besides the cost at the university. I'm pretty sure that real estate in California has done much better than, or worse, depending how you look at things, if you're trying to sell or you're trying to buy, than this. I think if you look at medical costs, I have a hard time imagining that they are in any better situation than this. So it's an endemic problem.
But one of the points I was trying to make, though, of course, is that over that time period, the wages have stayed relatively the same. When I give you that example, adjusting for inflation, there's
probably that's the abnormal part.
That's exactly it. So what we're saying is that we have a shift of people looking at it as a way of getting better salaries, and yet there's a disconnect between the cost of getting that education and getting the better salaries.
Jaime?
It might be that we've lost purchasing power. I think that is a component. I think that the real gap is made up of several factors, but I actually think that the costs are spiraling out of control in a bad way and in a sustainable manner. I know some numbers from MIT, and I'm sure several other schools are in the similar boat. The number that MIT charges for tuition is not the cost, is the number that the system will bear, which is what other schools charge.
The price versus cost.
It's very simple to, MIT publishes their endowment, is $13 billion. Part of it gets reinvested, and the rest goes into our enterprise. We pump over $500 million a year from the endowment into our educational enterprise, which we spend at the end of the year, is gone. We offer need-blind financial aid, and the budget for need-blind financial aid is also published. It's $100 million. So there is a ton of money that goes into running that operation. Labs are very expensive. We do very expensive things at MIT that you need money. But I think a lot of good things come out of it. I still think it's a very worthwhile enterprise. But I have to point out as a parent that I just dropped my son at the dorm earlier this year. And I think the dorms nowadays look a lot nicer, than they looked a few years ago.
And the cafeterias are much nicer. And the buildings and a lot of the perks that go with it, it's really part of the system. It's part of the competition, and it goes back to this personal benefit because the market bears it, and you are able to get the reward at the end in terms of higher salary. The whole thing is spiraling up to a point which I don't think is possible for a nation to offer this type of education to all the people that really would need it for the nation to remain competitive.
Before we move on to the next topic, let me ask a question that Alec touched on. Given the cost increases, let's assume that we can't solve that problem, at least not in the short term. Does that mean that more parents and or students will want their son or daughter to pursue engineering or science, even more particularly aerospace engineering? Is that going to have an impact on the choice of majors, do you think?
We've seen it.
You've seen it?
We've seen it. In the last 10 years, it's been very clear in terms of the great gaining popularity. My concern going forward is that I think the community is shifting to almost a consensus that the best way of educating engineers is a way that makes it even more expensive to educate the engineers. It's hands-on experiential learning more. And so the question is, how do you arrive at that future in a way where we don't become like other fields where we've priced ourselves out of the market?
Okay. Well, on that somber note, let's stop for the moment with respect to that topic. And Jaime, would you tell us about research and research funding and what's going to happen and what new challenges are going to be before us?
And federal spending, and you call that the cheerful, the cheerful note. Well, I really cannot predict the future, but certainly there are some things which I think we can look at, and I think that these are facts. And let me just go and think in terms of and that's something that affects research universities. I really think we will need to learn how to operate in a slightly or in a different environment moving forward. There are some hard constraints out there, which is that we have sequestration. We've seen a reduction 5 to 7% in the in R&D budgets from federal sources. That's going to stay flat for 20 years. There might be measures passed that alleviate that situation, but the reality is that it's not even going to follow inflation. So that's the boundary condition we are going to have to live with. I know at MIT about 20, or close to 25 in some departments of the research comes from industry, but that's from a 10%, if any, or even lower years back. So industry is making some inroads into supporting university research, but and that is good within reason. I think there is a tendency, and that's when when you've done it too much, when industry comes to university to try to do their research in a cheaper way, and really does not come to university with the right type of problems, but comes with problems that they really want to see solved. So I really think one needs to watch that. The reality is that, again, in aerospace in particular, which is where I come from, I think the research of sequestration is going to have a very dramatic effect. I don't know whether it's going to be the worst sector, but it's certainly going to be one that's going to get hit in various accounts. First of all, this country probably has a military industry or military aerospace industry that probably we do not need. that we cannot maintain at the current size. Sequestration is making a big impact on that. Again, it's not only sequestration, but what the federal government decides to do in terms of exports has a big impact on our defense aerospace industry as well. You would say that the air transportation field is looking up. Things are looking good in that front. But then again, sequestration has a potential serious impact if FAA does not do all the reforms and implements the new next gen and increases capacity, certainly at the US level. Internationally, we still see this as a growth area. So federal funding and federal policy have a tremendous impact on our sector, and the way things are looking up right now, it's not great. I think it's very important that we get the word out there and that we get our politicians to understand that this is a very critical sector for all of us and that we have to maintain it. Space, again, more of the same. NASA's had a very difficult job, which is trying to do more with less. That's always very difficult. So you would find the more critical voices saying that they are lacking direction and they have to find a way to move forward. But the reality is that the budgets have been diminished, and in the current environment, things have been very hard. So I think it's not very uplifting, but I think in terms of, things may change, hopefully will change, but in the current climate, I think there are serious concerns for aerospace.
Yeah. Reminds me of a remark I heard from the CEO of Boeing several CEOs ago. And one of the other aerospace company CEOs was saying, you know, we would have done better to take our money and put it in a savings account. We would have made more return on our investment. And the CEO of Boeing said, yes, but we wouldn't have had nearly as much fun. So we're having lots of fun, right? We're not making much money, but we're having lots of fun. Charbel, what do you think?
I'm concerned that we're going to go through 5 years, if not a decade, of serious challenges, particularly in our field, primarily because you know, most of us don't get our funding from NSF, for example, but from DOD, DOE, NASA, and these organizations that I have mentioned, just as examples, have their own researchers. So yes, the competition is going to be even tougher because yes, they're going to be pressed between a rock and a hard wall, figuring out, you know, how yes, to make solutions that are optimal for everyone. And the other thing is that I can see the signs of all this even for some time now, with these extra sensitivity for those who are familiar with the jargon between 6.1 and 6.2 research. It sounds like for many program managers, the minute you start talking about engineering, you're talking about 6.2. And to try to explain to them that this is 6.1, I've never encountered, you know, so much difficulties as in the last 5, 6, 7 years probably, and is getting worse and worse. And given that all these agencies are doing, in my opinion, a phenomenal job at trying to save the 6.1, the fundamental research part of the money, as intact as possible, which they should be commended for. But then it's the same bad news for you, because then you're told you don't qualify for it because you're engineering, you're not doing enough fundamental research. This is more for the physics, the Nobel Prize material, blah, 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 and all that stuff. So this is what you get, you know, when you are under pressure to deal with budget cuts and all these things. And yes, one could hope that there will be an upturn of the economy so that all these things will suddenly become a summer cloud. But I don't know for how long.
Alec, how are we going to solve it?
Well, if you look at how much investment the country makes every year in R&D, it's about $450 billion a year. About $150 billion of it is from the federal government. So most of it is in industry.
And it's mostly D rather than R.
Mostly D.
Yeah, yeah.
To your point about 6.1 versus 2. Yeah. if you look at how much research money the federal government provides to academia, it's rough numbers, 30-something billion a year. Interesting enough, industry provides on the order around $3 billion a year. The universities fund $10 billion a year of research from its own dollars. So we spend 3 times as much money from the university funds as we get from industry. And yet, certainly in the R&D, and I would submit there's a lot of R in there at $300 billion a year. Yep. There's some opportunity. I agree with my colleagues. I don't see any changes in the federal government coming anytime soon. And in fact, if you want to see what the future looks like in engineering, just look in the medical and healthcare fields, where they're shifting from fundamental research to translational research. And there's a gloat of PhDs and postdocs in those areas.
Yeah, I'm in a university where we have a medical center. In fact, we're a large medical center with a small university to complement it. And as you know, 60 to 70% of all federal funding to universities comes from NIH.
Right, exactly.
So there's NIH, and then it drops off very substantially. And as you also know, that community is now suffering. After many years of doubling budgets over 5 and 10-year cycles, they're now seeing plateaus that we've seen in DoD funding some time ago. So that's even more sobering and
but I think the opportunity is
think.
industry.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there needs to be better partnerships with industry, and it may have to be more, we have to be willing to do a little bit more D than R.
So one positive note, and I don't know to which extent this is happening everywhere or not. Certainly I heard that it is happening at MIT, and I would have expected it. But, you know, we look at these numbers in the School of Engineering at Stanford, and the participation of industry in research at Stanford, I can't say is going exponential, but it's going faster than linear. And it's definitely more than 20% than the total. It's much more than 20% than the total amount. Probably it is because it's the Silicon Valley, and probably that it's not well distributed across all 9 departments of the School of Engineering. But it is, it's noteworthy that both donors and industry, donors means in their personal capacity, it's amazing that they're pitching in and they're coming in. And actually there was an article, I wish I did as good a job as you did at picking from, there was an article in about a year ago where I think President Obama or someone else high up in the administration got a number of billionaires together to say that probably they should start funding research and contribute, because they had the potential to contribute as much as, or to some scale that is noticeable at the level of the scale of government. And that's probably part of the solution, that if this country, you know, wants to stay where it is and keep its leading edge, is that people wake up and most of our people who are well-to-do have been very generous so far in a number of different activities. Research could be one of them.
Is this privatization of the space launch business, if you want to call it that, is that a plus in terms of potential for research funding, or more generally for the country? What do you think?
Well, I've always been a big fan of the SpaceX and the likes and things like this for multiple reasons. And not on any philosophical reason, but if I go by watching the trends, people who are doing very well in our neighborhood are being extremely generous, more than any could have expected. And therefore, I can only predict that, yes, this, I wish them all good success, because yes, probably they will give us as good a return as government does.
Something big, something important, like going to the moon, you cannot do it with private money. You can at some point, like low Earth orbit, access to space has been transitioned to the private industry. I think that's the right thing. I think it's good news that it's happening. I think it's good that NASA tries to focus going beyond low Earth orbit. That's also good. But that needs to be federal funds. If we want enterprises of this caliber, that has to be taxpayers' money, in my view.
Okay. With that, let's pause and take a deep breath. I know there's some questions out there that have emerged over the last hour. I can see Dan Inman on the edge of his seat, and there are probably others. But if you have a question, fire away. And feel free to ask really tough questions. They can handle it. Yes, sir.
Would each of you comment on what you think the primary objective of aerospace engineering education is, and how it would be affected by distance education or by appropriate research funding?
Oh, that's a good question. Who wants to start off? I think Jaime looks like he's ready.
I agree.
I think I can take part of the question, and because that's a question we ask ourselves all the time. And do we need an aerospace engineering department? Well, what is different about what we do that we cannot do with mechanical engineers or electrical engineers or other types of engineers that the aerospace industry certainly is hiring all the time? Mm-hmm. And the conclusion is that aerospace is all about combining a very a very broad set of disciplines and trying to design products or systems which work under very narrow margins with very critical constraints. And this is more of a value than a question of value than a question of content in that respect. So, and I think this is the essence of what we do, and this is what we need to make sure we preserve, because as soon as we lose this system perspective, these multidisciplinary interactions between the various components, I think there is little reason to educate aerospace engineers the way we educate them. Now, you ask, following on that, you ask questions which are very hard, and I probably like to defer to my colleague, like, how is distance education going to affect that? Hard to tell. I'm a strong believer in experiential learning. When I say that distance education is here to stay, I'm also saying that experiential learning we know is the most effective way to teach. So, difficult to tell. I'll leave it at that.
Charbel, Stanford is interesting in this respect because you do not have an undergraduate program in aerospace engineering, but you do have a graduate program.
Correct.
So part of that must be historical, but occasionally you must debate that point. So what's the wisdom on that?
First, let me just mention that it's nice to see David. I didn't know he had connections with the University of Michigan. But you know, I had an experience as a department chair in Colorado, where we had a very large undergraduate department. And I am also at Stanford. I am in a unique position where I'm the chair of Aero, but I'm only 50% in Aero and the other 50% in mechanical engineering. And before becoming chair of Aero, I have spent 5 full years of full-time in mechanical engineering. So whether it's at the University of Colorado at the undergraduate level or at Stanford at the graduate level, I definitely see a difference. And the difference is not in what we teach. The difference is in the students themselves. If I had to summarize what is an aeronautics student, is someone who is passionate about what they're doing. There is this passion of they want to become, you know, conquer the moon, becomes astronauts, fly, you know, F-18s and F-7777, whatever the number would look like, to the point that I can give you an anecdote. They communicated this passion so much to me that I got upset that Lockheed Martin hired more computer scientists than aerospace engineers from our department back in Colorado. And I visited the VP of Human Resources at Fort Worth, Dallas. She was nice enough to welcome me and to listen, and after me ranting for about 20 minutes, she asked me, "Are you done?" And I said, "Yes, I am done." And she told me, "Well, have you looked, besides looking into how many offer we made, or rather you probably looked at how many people came to Lockheed from computer science versus how many came from aeronautics. Have you looked at how many offers we have made to each department, I mean to each affiliation? I didn't see where she was going. That shows you how dumb I was. And essentially she was telling me that most of our students turned her down. Why? Because every one of them wanted to design an airplane. They were not interested in programming something that someone else was going to give them. They wanted to build the next missile. They wanted to build the next airplane. That's what they wanted, because that's why they signed up for this in the first place. And she'd ask me, well, Charbel, how many new airplanes do you think this country has? If you look at the numbers from, you know, before World War II to now, it's going down. So our field is really characterized by kids who sign up for this job because they are passionate about what aerospace engineering is about. And as much as I recognize lots of good things, you know, of good contributions of technology to this, I don't see how technology can communicate passion. These people get passion, you know, they communicate it to others, they need to get connected. And it reminds me of something else also that connects with this that I learned at Colorado, is one of our donors who gave for the ITL, the Integrated Teaching Lab, you know, who said, I see, I hear, I forget. I see, I understand. I touch, then I'll remember. So that is, the last part is going to be very difficult to put into this distance education. And that's why at Stanford, when we have been talking about the online education from the beginning, it has been in the scope of the master's program, not in the scopes of the undergraduate program, where I don't think for the moment the vast majority is willing to accept the concept that the challenge is that big, and much less at the PhD program, where there's a lot of you know, experimental component and a dynamics that sets, you know, with your advisor and everyone around you. It's really the master's program that is the biggest candidate for being the pilot program, if you want, for this revolution in education. But to summarize, it's all about passion, and I have a hard time to see how we can propagate that flame, you know, on the internet. So.
Okay. Alec, you want?
Nothing.
You're
to add.
fine.
Nothing to add.
Yes, sir.
I thought I read a study that said one of the major causes of increase of cost of university education was in the rise of administration versus teaching. The number of people.
I feel good now.
Have you heard that? Have you heard that study?
Who wants to
I
talk
have
about
some
one?
data on that.
Yeah.
We've done that study at MIT, and in the last 20 years, the number of administrators has not increased relative to the number of faculty, yet the tuition has gone up. So I've read that too, but administrators is one. I think there is a general creep of overhead, but that's my personal perception. Services are more expensive, and there are more services being offered. But that was.
Alec?
So if we look at state universities, we see over that same time period, of course, a reduction in the amount of support being provided to state universities from the states. And so what has to happen is that there are some increases in terms of the costs or the price associated, the need to educate students, but as the amount of contribution comes in from the state decreases, that has to be compensated elsewhere. And certainly if you look at the state universities over time, if you look at the University of Michigan, for example, what we get from the state of Michigan now, if you inflate it based on the higher ed inflation rate I talked about before, you have to go back to the 1970s to see the same level of investment. And so that's also part of it, the investment that we get from the states to support the educational mission.
Charbel?
You know, I mean, I don't want to understate the cost issue, but I can't resist saying that if I compare what the students, whether they are undergraduate or graduates, the quality of the education they are getting now compared to the one that I got 27 years ago. I mean, we're comparing apple and oranges. The labs that I see today, the teaching labs that I see today, the one that I see particularly outside Stanford, are an order of magnitude, if not 2 orders of magnitude, better than any research lab and much less teaching lab, you know, that I had gone through when I was a kid. So this is why, again, I don't want to pretend that there is not a cost issue, but perhaps it needs to take into account that we're comparing, it seems to me, apples and oranges. I mean, the education the kids are getting today is totally. On the other hand, yes, I would like to see that they're not as much pampered, particularly in the dorms. You know, and the food and all that stuff. There are few things that, I mean, I live at Stanford. I had to have a huge mortgage at Stanford, and my daughter decided to live on campus. And why? Because probably she was being pampered much more than she was pampered at home. And that's certainly something that we can cut. But Jaime rightfully said that that's the competition factor that, you know, you have to. So we're driving a few things, but I think that by far they're getting a much better education than the one that I got.
Yeah. Very good. That's a good point. Yes, sir. And then I'll come to you.
Just want to give your feedback on the role of co-ops and internships in education now.
Okay. You have co-ops at Michigan? No?
We have a vibrant internship program. We have a small co-op program, but where I did my undergrad, we had a huge co-op program.
Yeah.
And I think that's as important as ever for a variety of reasons. I think especially we have 4 months summer breaks, and so you can have pretty long internships. It's a great way for companies, of course, to try you out. You learn, you're interacting, you're practicing engineer, and that sort of feeds into the education mission for a variety of reasons. I always tell students when we're talking about going into a co-op or internship situation, it's as important to find out what you don't want to do as it is to find out what you do want to do. And what a great time to really get fine-tuning on your trajectory by doing these type of internships and co-ops. So I think critically important. And the last thing, I'll put a plug for not necessarily thinking about co-ops solely in the United States. I mean, the world is flat, and so there's an opportunity in Michigan, and I'm sure the other institutions, really pushing our students to do more and more overseas, abroad experiential learning through co-ops and other activities.
Jaime, you want to say something?
No, very quickly. I cannot say enough good things. We do have internships. I think it's a perfect example of partnership between industry and universities that we need to. It's happened. And I really see a big role in the future. The only thing I would say, I think it's, from the industry perspective, I think the industries that do it best are those that understand that internships are an investment for the future and that offer an exciting and vibrant experience and learning experience to the interns. You said that it's important to find out what they want and they do not want to do. We do find the students coming back from internships deciding that that was very useful because that's exactly the company I do not want to go and work for. So, but the reverse is also true.
Yeah.
So I think it's an investment for companies to engage in that.
Charbel?
The only thing I can add to this is that you will find that everybody, you know, is excited about this and supportive. But right now, around me at Stanford, most kids, this is an expectation. I mean, we have a hard time keeping them in summer, for example, around in the labs. They have already lined up their internship, and if they haven't been successful, they put pressure on us to find an internship for them, even when they are funded for a PhD, let's say, over a 3-4 year program. They still want to interrupt in summer and go and see the world outside, see something else, which is very positive. And again, this is really coming bottom up. It's coming from them. And most of the time, I'm just being informed the last minute that this summer I'm going here and there. And
Yes, sir.
Wondered if you wanted back to the internet education and so forth. I purchased a lot of the teaching company things. I don't know if you're familiar with those. What the teaching company does is take a given subject and looks around the country for the best teacher, one that conveys the thing well. And it comes not only comes audio, I get the DVDs so you see the professor, that also comes with the study guide. Whether that's suitable for engineering, I'm not sure. But the subjects that they cover, and the big advantage of it, you do it at your own time, and you can repeat it. So if you didn't understand that lecture, you haven't lost it. You go back and look at it. And I wonder if you're going to do an internet education, would that be the kind of way that it's generated so that it's available at any time and can be repeated? So if you don't understand that week's lecture, you go back and learn better. So it would change again the dynamics, how long it would take, and the interruption factor could possibly be even worse. Any comments on doing that?
Okay. Jaime?
You are mentioning some of the things that online education can offer that traditional education cannot do. So we've always complained about the things that we cannot do online. There are things that you can do, and you're just mentioning them. I think you need to play to your advantages, and clearly there are things that are possible. One of the things that online education is doing is keeping people honest, or more honest than they would perhaps otherwise do. We have students in our classrooms with a laptop open, checking whether what you are saying is right or not, and if not, they are not shy of stopping you and correcting you. The courses are out there. The information is out there, so you really cannot get away with anything. It's just very difficult these days. So I think online needs to sort out a sustainable model. How are we going to do it? Who is going to pay for it? And how are we going to develop all that? Personally, I think there are tremendous possibilities as well as challenges. But you just highlighted some of the options.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir. You have it.
Yeah, the phrase was mentioned, the world is flat, and at least in engineering, the nature of engineering has changed quite a bit in the last 20 or 30 years. Digital designs in the 90s, tools that are used around the world and so forth. So my question is, how are the non-engineering skills that you seek to develop in your students changing in this world where we have more distributed development? It's global. We've got people of different cultures using common tools. What are you doing? What are the skills there, and what are you doing about it?
Great question. Who wants to try that one? Alec.
Sure. Why don't I volunteer?
Yeah.
So part of it is trying to find ways of having a campus as international as the various campuses we have here represented on stage, to have the students interact. And it sounds a lot easier than it is. You can look through the stats and you can say we have this number of percentage of students from here, 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 et cetera, and they're in the same class even. But that doesn't mean they're having rich interactions among themselves in the different groups, so that's part of it. People have experimented, and we've done the same here. We're having classes that are actually being taught, design courses, different parts of the world, so you have a team in South Korea or a team in Japan working with the teams here. And then I mentioned before the need to go on internships, and also we have a goal of trying to get a large percentage of our students to have at least one meaningful experience overseas, precisely for the reasons you mentioned, that if they go off into engineering, it's very, very likely that they're going into a very flat organization that touches all over the world. I will say, though, that I find that this generation of students, they're much more amenable to doing things like that. It's sort of a little bit in their DNA to be more accepting. Perhaps it's the way they're educated with access to information from around the world, and an appreciation for different types of cultures and so on and so forth. So it's not a hard sell. I worry about, again, going back to resources, is how do we get our faculty members who grew up in a different way and have a different mindset to somehow embrace this different way of providing this type of education in a meaningful way in which we can do it at the right price point.
Jaime?
Yeah, very briefly. About 15 years ago in our department, we really put a lot of effort into what we call contextualizing education. Credit should really go to my predecessor, Ed Crowley, who really led that effort. But that was a realization of this changing environment that the students really need to cultivate many more skills in addition to the technical skills. And the way we go about that is trying to replicate with as much realism as possible the world out there within our classroom. We work with capstone projects which are sponsored by industry, real projects, real deadlines, real flying dates, and try to do that as much as we can. There are challenges with it, but when it works, I think it provides a very rich experience. So we are working on that.
Charbel, you can have the last word.
It's been fun to be on this panel.
Please join me in thanking our panel. Thank you all very much. I think we're now ready for a break. Is that true? Very good. Thank you all.
I think it's something that America needs to continue to invest in technologies and the future of innovation.